Hey folks, I'm going to talk about diplomacy in 4X games. Now, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about might actually translate to other games genres as well, because the way that a human being interacts with a stone-cold CPU is usually through the medium of diplomacy in these games, right? So I think some of this stuff might translate across to things like grand strategy games as well. I'm actually going to use an example of a game later on, to talk about one of the concepts from grand strategy. But generally speaking, I'm using 4X as my framework. Okay. So it's going to be difficult to cover everything in half an hour. I don't want to do a very, very long rambling video. So I've actually written down a whole bunch of points that I want to discuss, and I'm going to use some examples from relatively well-known games, so that you can, so I can illustrate the point really without it all becoming sort of academic fart sniffing, which is one of the problems I think talking about games design. It can sometimes devolve into that, and I'm actually not qualified, I don't think, really to talk about things on that level. I think it's better just to look at the games and we can just see what is there. That's easier for you and me, I think. Okay, so what is diplomacy in a 4X game? Why does it exist? I think there's a couple of reasons, and I'm going to actually use Civilization 4 here just as an example, because I want to show you what a kind of standard diplomacy system looks like in 4X, and most of them seem to come from Civ. Okay, so I'm using Civ 4 because it's the one I've got installed, and it's the best one in my opinion. So here we have the beautiful Isabella of the Spanish Empire, and she's pleased with me. So immediately we see one of the reasons why we have diplomacy. It's partly there to give you an insight into what the opposing player thinks, because since these are empire building games, you can't always be at war with everybody at once, right? It's not just a war game, and surviving against coalitions, or when multiple empires kind of do what's called a dog pile, they all jump onto you and attack you at the same time, it's very, very difficult. Okay, it's very difficult to deal with, and so we have these systems, these diplomatic systems, and there's multiple reasons for them existing. One of them is to give you an insight, hopefully, into how that AI empire feels about you. So you can see here, look, we've got this list. Civ's really good because it actually tells you what the AI is thinking. So, for example, it shows you the modifiers. Years of peace have strengthened our relationships. We care for our brothers and sisters of the faith. We appreciate the years you have supplied us with resources. Our open borders have brought our people closer together, but our close borders spark tensions and you refuse to help us. Right, so this gives the player an insight into what that opposing player, the AI player, is thinking. This is also a dual purpose, right? Because it also serves for immersion as well. So you're not just dealing with this stone cold CPU that is making these moves against you, and you kind of don't know, you don't know what it's thinking, and it can be very impersonal. So for a start, look, we've got a smiley face on this stone cold CPU algorithm that's running, and she's pretty as well, look. So we've got this pretty face that's telling us exactly what she thinks of us in terms of the game mechanics. So it's partly there for immersion, so that you don't feel like you're just playing chess against a chess computer, and it's there partly because it's a window into what the AI is willing to tell you about the game. Okay, now there's arguments to be had whether total transparency or some level of fog of war opacity is desirable in games, and I think it really depends upon what the game is. Some games really, really work better if they've got a bit of fog of war and they don't tell you everything, and I think some games are better if you like, for example, Civ is a very board game-ish rule-based game, and I think it can be frustrating for people if they don't know exactly what's going on. I don't think that's always the case, but we'll talk about that another time. But the reason why I mention that, by the way, because I think it's good to bookmark these issues and we can think about them later. So if you've got any comments on that, let me know. Okay, so the other reason why diplomacy exists in these games is not just to show you an insight into what the player is thinking, but it also gives you an opportunity to be able to interact with them in a way that isn't just destroying stuff or taking territory away from them. So for example, in this game we are able to trade various things. So we can trade gold, we can set up an agreement to trade gold per turn, we can trade technologies between one another. There are game critical resources that have a game mechanic effect on your cities that we can actually trade between one another if we've got a surplus. So that makes these resources desirable to get, because as you saw, we get a bonus, okay, if we're trading. So the best the best diplomacy systems in these games really wants to be tied carefully into the other game mechanics. For example, like in Galciv and other civilization-ish games, if you've got trade agreements with people, it makes them like you more, and they are less likely to go to war with somebody they've got a trade agreement with. Galciv 4 is even better because it kind of goes one further. It actually, the longer you trade with people and the more valuable your trade, actually the better bonus you get. So if you've got a long-standing trade partnership with somebody, they are much less likely to go to war with you, and depending on their personality, and I think that's really, really cool. So anyway, and then you can do things like you can trade cities and stuff. So it's there to trade resources, so as a resource exchange system. Okay, there's some other stuff that you can do in Civ as well, and this is often copied across to other 4X games. So yeah, we can have a look at what the existing deals are, and then there's usually this, what else do you want to discuss? And you can declare war. Okay, so now we come to another purpose of diplomacy, which is to set the state of relations between two empires or two factions or two players, whether that's war, whether that's peace, whether it's some kind of collaborative effort. By the way, I'm finding Isabella incredibly distracting because she's just kind of pouting at me. Yeah, so it's for setting relations, whether it's war, peace, collaboration of some kind, whether it's trading resources or, working together to get more research. I'm gonna have to turn her off, man, because she's just too hot. You can also ask what she thinks of various things. So if we had other players in the game, you could say, hey, what do you think about Prince Albert over there? And she'll be like, well, it's not my favorite kind of piercing. You get what I mean? So there's other information that you can often get out of the players. This, by the way, Civ 4's got a great mod called Fall from Heaven 2, and if I remember right, there's some cool stuff you can do in this menu here. There's some other options that are very, very closely tied with the lore-based game mechanics. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with diplomacy systems if they're working well. Now, begone thought, and we're going to have a look at a different game. Man, she was distracting me. My missus is going to get upset with me. Let's see. We're going to move to another game now, and we're going to have a look at what are some of the problems with this. In fact, let's just do it now. Now I've got rid of Isabella and I can concentrate. So what are the problems with this system? Well, because the system in Civ has pretty much been copied across to all 4X, not all 4X games, but to most 4X games, it's often it feels like it's just been tacked on so it can tick a box, has diplomacy, or is a 4X game because it has diplomacy. Because I think diplomacy has become such a mainstay of 4X games, and you'll see why, right? You'll understand why. You do need the ability to interact with the other players if you want to have a believable empire building game where you're not just at war with everyone. War games generally don't have diplomacy, okay? In classic historical war games, they generally don't have diplomacy, and if you do, I would argue that those games are more towards the grand strategy side of things. So this system gets copied, and it's often carbon copied as well. It's like Xeroxed, okay? So if you go and play, I like Fallen Enchantress Legendary Heroes. It's a Stardock game, and just bear in mind that I do work for Stardock, so you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. However, are we a little critical of Fallen Enchantress? Even though I think it's a great game, it's pretty much just kind of Xeroxed that civilization style diplomacy system over, and it doesn't really use it in a big way other than the bare minimum, which is resource exchange to get an idea of how they feel about you, and the other players how they feel about you, and as a method of immersion, and to kind of just setting relation states. So I think that as long as you've got those basics in there, then you're going to have the basics of a 4X game. But a really good diplomacy system will also be tied into other game mechanics, like I showed you with Civ, right? So I'll just try not to talk to her for too long because she's so distracting. What are the current... So let's go to a trade proposal. So, for example, that you can get resources and trade them. So there's a reason for you to get excess resources rather than just to take them individually for your city, okay? So I know that if I get more fur, or I get extra pigs or whatever, and Isabella here, she's got extra whatever it is Isabella's got, then we can trade with her, okay? I'm gonna have to get rid of her. Stop winking at me. So yeah, it can often, you have to have these mechanics that are tied in with the game, with the diplomacy, because the diplomacy becomes more compelling as a result. Okay, So that's one of the problems. It can often feel a little bit tacked on if it doesn't really add to the gameplay in a big way. The other thing is that diplomacy can actually work against the game's design, particularly if the game is very war focused. We're going to look at an example of a game in a little while that's going to show this. So we'll bookmark that one, come back to it. The other problem is with the diplomacy in these games is, unless it's well designed, it can often be easy to cheese the AI. So for example, let's say that Isabella here is attacking us, and somebody else, let's say that she's friends with us, but somebody else is attacking us, right? I can try to butter her up to try to keep her from attacking me too, and to prevent that dreaded dogpiling situation. Or it might be that, say, she's kind of looking like she's angry with me. So what I do is I just start doing stuff that kind of games the system to stop her from being angry with me, because I don't want her to engage in war with me until I've built enough troops so that I can be sure to attack her. Now, some might argue this is not necessarily a flaw. So, for example, it's a valid tactic in real war, right? In real grand strategic situations where you may well antagonize, or you may look weak. You know, it's classic Sun Tzu, right? Hey, look at me, I don't have any military units. Why don't you come and invade me? And then they invade you because you look weak, and all of a sudden your units pop up out of nowhere, or your ally attacks them. And you know, this is like classic art of war. But I think that most 4X games are not great with the mechanics in order to be able to play with that kind of stuff. Now, some of them are, some are better than others, but often when they're not that good, you can really just use diplomacy. So for example, a classic example with me, let's say I've got a pile of gold, and this thought here is, you know, looking like she's wanting to attack me, but she needs gold. I can just dump a whole load of gold on her and go, just don't attack me because I'll give you some gold. Okay. Now again, that might work. That might sound like it's a planned situation, but in terms of how the game unfolds and feeling gamey, you know, in terms of kind of being a little bit unrealistic. Like let's say this is a real world situation, right? And Isabella, she needs oil, right? Because her country's running out of oil, her people are starving because they've got no power or fuel, and I've got the oil, I've got no army, but I just go, hey Isabella, go away, I'll just give you, you know, loads of gold. And she goes, oh, all right then. Well, she's still not got her oil, but now she's locked by her own game mechanics into not being able to attack me, because she's now happy artificially because she's got this gold that she doesn't need, and her people are still starving because she's not got the oil, right? Obviously, in that case, she's going to have to figure out another way to make ends meet. Perhaps she gets on OnlyFans. So we've established that the game can feel a little bit easy to cheese the AI with. You know, you can often use it just to delay people from going to war with you until you're ready. That's a problem. It also gives a limited range of options for interactions, and so, you know, sometimes players might expect more of, you know, more things to be able to do in certain games. So it can, like this. Obviously, if you have too many diplomatic options, the games can become a little bit overwhelming. But you do occasionally see complaints where people are like, why is it that I can't do this? And the answer is usually tied to some other reason. You know, the developers tend to think about these things, like, you know, but not always. So it might be something obscure like, why is it that I can form a trade agreement with Isabella here, but I'm not able to end it in, you know, like, you know, set an ending timer or something like that. So it becomes a little bit of a Pandora's box, right? You allow diplomacy, and then people start to expect to be able to do more and more and more, and then this can have a little bit of a negative effect on games design, in the sense that now you've got to start planning for player expectations. Okay. All right, I'm going to come out of this now, and we're going to talk about some examples of where of games with good diplomacy. And what I mean by good diplomacy is it does more than the bare minimum, okay? I think the diplomacy system in Civilization is pretty good. One of the issues with Civ as a game is the multiple victory conditions, and that often makes, you know, when you've got multiple victory conditions, which means that different players are kind of playing a different game with one another, right? Yeah, still, Civ isn't too bad. Civ 4 is pretty good because it's balanced so that, you know, if you're going for a certain type of victory, then it's still kind of balanced with the other victory conditions, and different games balance this in different ways. Some are better than others, and I think that the more victory conditions you have in a game, the more difficult it is to tie the diplomacy in a meaningful way into those victory conditions, because I'm going to show you a game that is really, really good with diplomacy and the reason why it works really well, and then that will give you a greater understanding of why it is that multiple victory conditions often kind of screw with diplomacy as a concept. Okay, so we're going to have a look at Master of Orion, and I actually showed off Remnants of the Precursors, which is Ray Fowler's excellent remake, in the last video that I did. So I'm just going to show you the original, because I think the original game's still great, by the way, and it's definitely worth a look. So the way that Master of Orion's victory condition works is, I mean, arguably there's two victory conditions, but really the way that it works is it's kind of just one, okay? So the way that you can win the game is you can either exterminate all your foes, which has the same effect, basically, or you can win the Galactic Council vote. Now, the way that it's tallied up is that all the population in the game, and you've got population that is logged on each planet, right? Oh God, I can't even remember how to control this game now. It's going to be a little bit slow because it's an old DOS game. So every planet here, look, is going to have a population, and those population get votes. And the population will vote for you, okay? And all of the population votes that you have for your civilization. No, actually, the way that it works, is that the top two races in the game, the top two players, they are nominated for potentially being the winner of the game, and then it's up to all of the other players to tally up the votes they get from their population to vote for one of those two players. That's it. I remember now. And so this is a really, really interesting victory condition because it kind of ties the diplomacy together. One reason is because every sort of so often, I forget how many turns it is. It might be every 10 turns or it might be every 20, but every so often there's a vote that comes up. So at that point, you've got to be aware that the vote's coming up, okay? And in order to win to survive the vote, because it's unlikely that you're going to win the vote early on in the game, but it is possible that you lose it, because if one of the other players is doing very well and they've got good relations with one of the other with the other factions, you can lose the game. So this drives all the other gameplay, and the reason is because you've got when you're deciding whether to go to war with someone to expand your territory, there's more than just economic situations, economic considerations or strategic military considerations. You've also got to consider the relations of your relations with the other races in the game as a game mechanic in of itself. They're not just a window into seeing how the players are acting, or so you can talk to these guys and kind of get some kind of audience with them or whatever. So some sort of immersion, right? Let me just go to Meclar so you can just see how this looks in Master of Orion. It's actually really cool. A little bit slow. I probably need to turn up the emulation speed on the DOS box. There you go. Hail Reverend Emperor of the Sagras, MS-35. Get best greetings from the most powerful Meclars. Yeah, you get the idea. And as you can see, you've got the familiar stuff here. Look, threatening them, offering tribute, exchanging technology, all that stuff. Okay. So anyway, the diplomacy system. Let's wait for this music to end. So the diplomacy system is not just there as a window into the game, into the CPU, and it's not just there to get a game state from people. It's also a game mechanic in of itself, because if you don't play this game correctly as you are doing all of the other stuff in your 4X game, you can lose the game, and you can also use that to win the game. So you can make people friends with you. Like for example, Silicoids are under attack by the Bulrathi, so I attack the Bulrathi, and the Silicoids like me more. Now the Bulrathi are not going to vote for me anymore, but the Silicoids will. And maybe if I've got enough votes from someone else, I can win the game, okay? So you have to play this diplomatic game too. It's tied to the victory condition. That is my point. Okay, so as you can see, games that have the best diplomacy systems, in my personal opinion, are not just ones that do the bare minimum, but they're also tied into the core game mechanics. Now, I've been talking about another game recently. I'm just going to briefly load that, and I'm going to show you another reason why the diplomacy can be very closely tied to game mechanics. Okay, folks, so we've also got here Emperor of the Fading Suns. Just going to turn this music down a little bit. Okay, so Emperor of the Fading Suns also has a very, very strong victory condition that's tied very closely with diplomacy. So this is one of the reasons why I find this game so fascinating. It's even more so than Master of Orion, I think, tied into the way that the game works on a fundamental level. So, for example, you've got this kind of diplomacy where, you just get messages in the game and they just tell you what's going on. So it's like, the Val will not tolerate the hostile actions of House Malric. Please restrain your species. So yeah, we get the immersion stuff, but he's also telling us something that's going to happen, right? That's kind of basic. Alright. Just bear with me a second, folks. I just want to turn this audio just down. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the other thing we've got in Emperor of the Fading Suns is the fact that the way that you win the game is you have to vote. You have to be voted, just like in Master of Orion, by other players. The difference is that in Master of Orion, you can change the amount of votes that other people have by taking territory off them or destroying population by bombing them. Okay, I didn't mention that, but that's kind of one way that you can play Master of Orion. If an enemy's got too many votes and they're not voting for you, you can go and destroy their votes by destroying their planets. Now, the one thing you can do, so the way this game works is, instead, every player has a number of votes again, but they are represented by these physical units called scepters. And it's the scepters that give you the votes, okay? So you can actually steal these from other players. So how does this tie into diplomacy? Well, the diplomacy system in this game is very, very complex and very, very detailed. So you can basically say to other players, okay, I want all of your votes at the next election. So what that means is he's going to vote for me, and bear in mind that you want people to vote for you in this game. Because if you can become the regent, then that gives you great power and it sets you up to win the game, okay? So you can offer things like, I'll give you all my votes for the next election, and, I'll give you, I sign an alliance, give you tech. This is a much more open and, what's the word? There's more variables in this diplomacy system than there are in Civilization. There's way more stuff that you can do with it, okay? It's not just about tech trading or about, setting up trade agreements. It's much more about bartering for power, and this bartering for power is the core of the gameplay. Okay, so for example, let's say that I say let's say we do this. Give me a ministry if you're elected. So I want the Imperial Fleet. Let's say that I want the Imperial Fleet, which is a very powerful position that gives you ships in the game temporarily. And those ships are very rare at the start of the game. If you've got the Imperial Fleet, you are a god of power in this game. Okay, so I say, hey, I want you to make me the fleet commander, and I'll give you all my votes in the next election. So I'm actually going to put Alvarex of House Hawkwood on the throne, really, in the regency position at least. And that makes him very powerful, but in return he's going to give me a very powerful position too, okay? And because this is he's going to want this, he's really going to want this. He's likely to say yes, depending on the game situation. Like if he doesn't hate me and he thinks that the fleet commander is going to make me too strong, he might do it, okay? And I might be able to, I might say, hey, give me some technology as well. And technology's got diminishing returns in terms of the research costs in this game. So technology is really, really important in this game. Really, really important. So anyway, this is the core of this gameplay, okay? And you can set up this elaborate Dune-like plans within plan situations where you're going to be like, okay, so he's now I'm going to try to make him happy. I'm going to make him the regent, and he's going to give me the fleet commander, right? And then when I've got fleet command, I'm going to use that fleet to go and weaken these other guys. Now I'm going to destroy all his ships. And once I've destroyed all his ships, I'm going to threaten him, and I'm going to say, you're going to give me all your votes in the next election, right? Or I'm going to make you regret it, or I'm going to declare war on you, or I'll do whatever. I'll unleash the plague, or ask the patriarch to excommunicate you, whatever it is that you're going to do. So because you've got this excess of power now, this guy is now going to look at you in a different way, and you can plan your game around this diplomacy system, okay? So this is not just a map painting game. Like Master of Orion to some extent is also not a map painting game because of that excellent, voting system that it's got. So you can win without painting the whole map, which is great because the game gets boring if you've got a map paint, right? For most people. This is not a map painting game. In fact, it's quite viable for you to only take a couple of planets, build up relatively small military forces, and just have enough that you can surgically strike for when you need to, to go in and steal some scepters that you've found, because you can steal the votes, you see, or you can kill the nobles on Byzantium 2, which is another way that you can kind of effectively stop people from voting against you, or voting for you even. So there are things that you can do, and so the whole gameplay is based around the diplomacy in this. So yeah, you can come up with all these elaborate plans. You don't need to necessarily build big empires. You can play the different factions off against one another, including the two NPC factions, which also have votes and a lot of power, and you can try to predict the time with which you can then go for victory. So this is a genuinely great grand strategy game where diplomacy and intrigue and backstabbing and all that comes into play. So this is an example of a game built around diplomacy, and it's a wonderful game as well. Okay, there's some other stuff that I want to show you quickly as well. There's another couple of games that I want to show you. This is probably going to be a little bit longer than half an hour now, but I hope you don't mind, because I think we're going to get to the root of why diplomacy is important and also why it can be a bit of a problem. Bear with me. Okay guys, this magnificent game is Imperium's Greek Wars. Now this is a 4X game that also can be played kind of like a grand strategy game, because you don't have to procedurally generate stuff. So here, for example, we're playing in the Mediterranean. Look, we've got where are we here? Yeah, here's Italy. Look, we've got North Africa. So this is the Rome versus Carthage scenario. But the reason why I brought this game up is because it's very, very interesting. Let's go open the state window. The reason why diplomacy is such a big part of this game lies in its resource economy and the fact that every player has limited resources. There's genuine resource scarcity in this game. Now, in the 4X version of the game, you often have, you know, everybody kind of gets the same starting resources, so it's not quite as asymmetric as it will be in the real life scenario settings, which is why I do advise, if you play this game, definitely try the pre-generated maps. They play very differently and it's really interesting. Now, in this game, if you've got a lack of, in most games, for example, if you've got a lack of money, like gold or credits, whatever you're playing, then you can't build a unit. Okay, well, that's a problem. There's often ways of getting around that, because you can usually make credits in other ways. In Imperium's Greek Wars, in order to build a spearman, you've got to build, let's just see if it tells you. So it will tell you what you need in order to build it. Right, so production. Oh no, sorry. I'm trying to remember how to. It's been a while since I played this. Anyway, let me just tell you how it works rather than messing around. So every unit will require different resources to build. It's kind of like Distant Worlds in that respect. So, for example, a spearman is going to need some metal and some wood. And if you run out of wood, you can't build spearmen. If you run out of metal, you can't build. You can't build your legions as the Romans, or you can't build whatever units that require metal, right? So it's really, really important that you have a steady influx of these resources that you need, and often there's an upkeep cost as well, which means you can't just you do have finite resources, if I remember right. So a gold mine will, they might be building mining a certain amount of time. I forget if they're finite or not, but you will have an upkeep cost. So you've got to basically trade with your allies for with the things that you need, or you've got to go to war. Okay, and there are other things as well. So the diplomacy system is really important, because in this game, if let's say that, I'm just going to make some crap up, but just give an example. Let's say these guys are in the way. This is Carthage own this part here. That's Sicily. Yeah. So let's say Carthage own this, and I need to get access to trade from Orion here. And they've got something I need, like wood, or they've got gold, or they've got stone, and I don't have enough of that. Now I've got to either negotiate with Carthage to say, hey, can you give me access, can I have trade route access through your nation? Okay, so let's just go to, hold on a minute. Yeah, Carthage. I'm trying to remember how you do the diplomacy in this one. I think it's in the state window, isn't it? Nope, that's not it. Foreign relations, there we go. So let's say we go to Carthage and we'll talk. Oh no, that's me. Okay, well let's just talk to these guys and pretend that these are, this is the situation. So what I can say is stuff like, can I have trade route access, please? This allows traders of the other player to go through their lands. What this means is that you don't necessarily have to be at peace with, so you don't have to necessarily be allied with somebody in order to get something beneficial out of them. Just being at peace with them is enough, because trade route access can be life-saving in this game, because if you've got no if you've got no food, right, and your ally lies behind these guys, and your ally's willing to trade you with food for something that you've got, but this guy is in the way, well, you need to keep him sweet, right, because you've got to get the trade route access. So you can also ask them for peaceful passage of your non-military units, and you can do things like ask for military unit access too. Okay, that's not that uncommon in 4X games, but the fact that the resource economy is so powerful in this game drives all of the other gameplay, because if this guy doesn't let you trade, you're going to have to go to war with him, because you're going to have to forcibly open up that position so that you've got access to your trade partners. So do you see why now that this game's amazing, by the way? Like, I wish people played it more. I think the graphics put people off a little bit because, you know, it's just, yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to read sometimes, but as far as game mechanics is concerned, it's remarkable. And I really maintain that it is the combination of this resource economy with multiple resources. There's a resource scarcity in the game, and you've got an excellent diplomatic a diplomacy system that you can use to really drives all the gameplay. You know, you really want to be figuring out who's going to be your ally, making your long-term plans like, okay, I want to go for victory, I need to go over here, but these guys are going to be in the way, and I'm going to need resources, and I know by X point of the game that I'm not going to have enough resources, so I'm going to keep those guys sweet. But if at some point through the game, now the guys that you're hoping to supply you with your stone or whatever, or your gold later on, or food, they suddenly turn sour on you, then your plans have got to change. You've got to be like, right, well, maybe I can't go here anymore. Maybe I have to go and talk to these guys. Well, maybe will they give me trade route access? Oh, they are. Well, okay. Well, that's great. Well, that now means that I can still do this. Or maybe you can't. Maybe you've got to go to war with someone else. So it's not just this is not just a system for delaying players from attacking you by bribing them with gold, or, you know, just to kind of try to figure out what it is that they think about you, you know, for essentially the same reason. When are they going to attack me? This is now a core driver of gameplay, and you will be dedicating your game, you know, your decision-making resources. The decision space is going to be filled with options for you to directly engage with the trade resource system and also with the diplomacy in order to facilitate that. So once again, the diplomacy is at the core of the gameplay. This is a well-designed game. Okay guys, I'm going to show you one of the best diplomacy systems in all of 4X games, even though this is arguably, you know, not a 4X, but it's very close. This is Warhammer 40k, This is Warhammer 40k Gladius Relics of War. Don't want to be mumbling my words when I'm coming out with a game with a name as magnificent as that. So, the reason why this has got an excellent diplomacy system that fully supports the game's design of this game is that it has no diplomacy. So the reason why that is important is because this is a war game. Now, anybody who knows anything about Warhammer 40k will know that diplomacy between certain factions is never ever going to happen. For example, I'm playing the Necrons here. They would never ever ever talk to this, you know, the Imperium. Not never ever ever, but let's just say that on an official basis, diplomatic relations between any Xeno and the Imperium of Man is completely forbidden. Pretty much. It's only the rogue traders that are really allowed to do it, and, you know, some naughty people who skirt around the rules and risk a visit from the Inquisition. So from a lore perspective, it makes sense that there's no diplomacy in this game. The way that the game works, this is a tactics game. This is what I call turn-based StarCraft. You have cities. You go out and find resources, you pacify the area of the natives, which are very powerful in this game, so it takes a long time, and then you pump out units, you research stuff to get better technology, you pump out more and more units, better and better units, and then you go engage in warfare directly on the strategic map with these with these units. And yeah, that's how the game works. Now, diplomacy does not work in this game. It would make this game bad because you know, in a two-player game, there's no reason to ever be at peace, right? Because you don't want to just be sitting there playing, you know, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, and playing this very, very limited city building game. This is not this game is not exciting enough as a city builder to not have any combat in. Okay, and you'll see this when I talk about the next game. But this game is very, very good in the sense that it skips diplomacy completely. Now, it does have its problems because of that. Like, if you are playing let's say you're playing on a game when you've got 3 enemy opponents, you've got to play carefully, because if you end up antagonizing all 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, you could end up with a 4-on-1 situation, and that's going to be very hard to play. But that's all part of how Gladius plays. You have to carefully take on the battles that you can win, and you often have to grind out a war of attrition with some of these guys. But you know, if you do get attacked by multiple players, it's very exciting because you've got to figure out how to deal with it. Okay, so this game is remarkable for a 4X like game in that it skips diplomacy completely, because diplomacy, like, if you could just say, all right, I don't want to be, you know, red, let's just be friends for a bit. The only reason why you have that, apart from a bit of immersion, which you don't need in this game because it's a very, very quite an immersive game anyway. The only reason you would have this is basically to say, I don't want you to attack me until I've dealt with green. Red, please be friends with me until we've dealt with green. Or maybe you say, red, could you gang up with me on green, and then we're going to fight each other. It just does not work. It's a bad. It would be a bad games design. Okay, hold that thought. Okay, so this is kind of an unofficial sequel to Warhammer 40k Gladius Relics of War, and it's called Zephon. It's by the same developer, obviously, as it looks very similar, as you can see. It's got the same tactical combat system, essentially. It's not quite the same. It's been improved in various ways. It's a very, very good game, this is, I think. The issue is that they've now, just for context, by the way, Gladius was their second game. The game that came before that was called Pandora First Contact, and that was a more standard 4X game like this one is. It had diplomacy and all that other stuff, okay? They stripped out the diplomacy for Gladius to make it a better game, in my opinion. Now, they've reintroduced diplomacy because this is now supposed to be more of a proper 4X game. I think this game looks cool, by the way. It's still got some mild readability issues, just like Gladius did, but it's actually a lot better. And I think that this is a really good effort at a game. Now, here's the thing. By introducing research, they've reintroduced the problem that you get in these very war-focused games, where you're now like, okay, so she's not going to talk to me. I like her because she's an Aussie and she's kind of fun. But like, yeah, so let's just talk to this dude. Maraheb. So you can do all the standard 4X stuff, offer gifts, you know, kind of like you can bribe them into not attacking you. You can ask for alliances. You can ask to attack people. There's trade agreements stuff. You can demand tribute, blah, blah, blah. The problem with this now is it's reintroduced the problem that I was talking about. And this is a really, really boring game if you're not at war with somebody, okay? The empire building is not that good. It's not that... and I'm not, you know, slating Proxy Studios here. I think they've made an amazing game, but the thing is, the thrust of this game, the core design principle, is excellent tactical combat. You don't play this game, in my opinion. Diplomacy works against the core design principle of what made Gladius great, which is this fantastic tactical combat game. I was playing this online. So I was playing it on a stream, and I think it was this game actually. And I found that I was at peace with everybody. I managed to peace out with everybody, or people were making peace with me. And so I played about 6 or 7 turns where there was nothing going on. I was literally just like kind of just building my cities up a little bit, and I was bored. I was like, well, I want to fight. I don't want to be at peace with everyone. This is not good. So they kind of reintroduced a problem into the game, but here's the thing, and you might have been thinking that I was going to use this as an example of a bad diplomacy system, and it's not. I think the reason why I brought this up is it highlights a conflict where there can be a conflict in design between the principle of having a very, very great combat game and then having a system that allows you to negate that great part of, that interesting part of the game. So you want everything in this game to be leading you towards war. That is the way to make this game work, okay? Because the war is the game. The war is the game. The 4X stuff is just a sideline. It's extra. It's fun in the context of the war. So it's really fun to be building these cities up, min-maxing your resources, picking which buildings, which units you want to go through, all the technology, all the cool 4X stuff. But it only works in the context of going to war and making war more fun and engaging. Diplomacy that allows you to be at peace with everybody is counterproductive to that. Okay, so there's a few things that I think they've done in this game to kind of remove this, and the main one. So guys, there's going to be some spoilers for Zephon here, and if you don't want the spoiler, please don't watch it. But I'm gonna load a game now and show you. Let me just go into here. So this is me at the end of the game. So this is a spoiler. So turn off now and wind it a few minutes forwards so you don't get the spoiler. Okay. So in Zephon, what happens at the end of the game, in the end game crisis, when we've now entered the last days of Earth, and the two main factions, the two NPC factions, Anchorite and Zephon, they're at war with each other now. And so the whole of the diplomacy in the game, up until this end game scenario, is all a preamble and maneuvering, both to make yourself more powerful and to gain favour with the other factions, in an effort to try to read which way they're going to go and who they're going to ally with, because this now becomes a big war, and it's kind of a big two-way war. And these two factions are very powerful. They're very difficult to deal with on your own, unless you've done very well in the game. So you've got these huge Titan units, look, that just come in and start stomping everything. So the issue with the game then is that or what they've done with the game is they've created this endgame scenario that ties together and gives an excuse for the diplomacy. I think this is very clever what they've done. Now, people might argue over whether this is a good system or not, whether the end game is very fun, you know, whether it's a bit repetitive. I've seen complaints about there's all sorts of stuff, but this is one way of making sure that the diplomacy actually makes sense now. There's a whole point to it, because the setup of this end game will determine how easy the end game is, and it will determine the type of victory, you know, it will determine the ending you get, and you know, this the way that the game plays out. So now there is this reason for diplomacy to exist in the game, and so going back in it actually makes a bit more sense. So yeah, I mean, so as you can see, we're an ally here, and she's under attack. So I can do all kinds of things, right? This is just a pretty standard diplomacy system, but it makes more sense. Now, there's the diplomatic options are actually different as well with Zephon and with the Anchorite. Now, it might be that they're not going to talk to us. Yeah, they're busy, and these guys aren't going to talk to us because we're at war with Zephon, and the Anchorite are. We've allied with them because for some reason we've chosen Cthulhu over Skynet. But if you pick Skynet over Cthulhu, then it's going to be a little bit different. Okay, so this is an example of what I would call, well, I don't know. I don't want to mind read the designers at Proxy, and I've not spoken to them. I could ask them, I guess. But I suspect that the end game scenario is not only there for the immersion, but I think it's also there to give shape to the 4x, you know, to give an excuse for bringing this back into the 4x element with adding things like diplomacy and trading and that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's a diplomacy system that is very kind of standard actually, but it's core to the gameplay. However, if you turn off the endgame scenario, which you can do in this, you've kind of got a bad version of Gladius. Now that's my opinion. I don't think diplomacy works at all in this game without the context of this endgame scenario, the last days of Earth. If you turn it off, then you've just got a very confused games design. Okay, I'm going to look at one more game now. This is going to surprise you, I think, for those of you who know my channel. This is going to surprise you, but I'm going to show you one more good diplomacy system. Okay, so guys, this is Age of Wonders 4. Now, this is not a game I praise it in a big way often, but I actually think that for the kind of game that Age of Wonders 4 is, the diplomacy system is pretty good, and I'll show you why. So Age of Wonders 4 is kind of like, it's very much like Gladius, I guess, in that it's got this, you know, interest. It's got an overworld map. This is more of a 4X game. It tries to be more of a 4X game than, you know, than Zephon, in the sense that it's got somewhat more involving 4X stuff. However, it's still kinda light. Now, this is the most complex game that the Age of Wonders series has been in terms of the strategic level gameplay, the city management. It's definitely, you know, it's definitely more so than Planetfall even. Now, the one thing that's notable is that you've got this system where you have these regions, right? It's a hex game, but you also have these regions, and the regions are important in terms of who owns what. So you don't own like individual hexes, they're split into these regions, and as your cities expand you can exploit these regions in different ways. So you'll get the option to to add these regions to your territory, and you can make claims on the territory too. So the reason why this has got an interesting diplomacy system, in my opinion, is it's kind of bog standard in many ways. Let's just see if we can find someone who's not upset. look at the state of that thing. So let's just talk to this guy. So you've got all the usual stuff, like, you know, you can negotiate for pacts, like alliances, defensive pacts, all that kind of stuff, peace and war. So you've got the state changes between your you know, states. You've got the states changes, let's say. You can also barter for you know, various resources in the game. This is just standard stuff. So, however, you've got this reputation system. This is a little bit more important than just getting people to like you. There's a couple of reasons why this is important. For a start, the relationship system is affected by in-game actions. So not only in a lore-based way, so if you do stuff that, you know, that is against their personality type, that will annoy them and they are more likely to go to war with you. Okay, that sounds like it's kind of similar to the, you know, usual 4X thing, except it's actually quite involving, because you'll come across certain decisions that you can take in the game that might give you various benefits or bonuses, but actually by taking those decisions, you will push your own alignment, because you've got this alignment system, right? Good or evil, basically. And you can push your alignment in different ways, and that will determine who likes you and who doesn't. So your actions in the game, in a very direct way, affect your broader image. And even though that's been a thing since Master of Orion, like, you know, if you're warlike and you bomb people, or you use like certain types of weapons that are considered to be terrible, you know, you bomb civilians out, other people are going to be terrified of you. Yeah? If you genocide a civilization in Master of Orion, you get this massive penalty to most of the AI factions. So your actions in a general way were always a thing. However, this is a little bit more specific now, because you have these factions almost that are grouped by alignment. So the diplomacy is quite important in this, and your actions are important. Now, the other thing is that you can't just declare war without justification. You have to have these war justifications, and the diplomacy system's key to making this work, because you can just declare war without justification, but then you will damage your reputation with every other player in the game. This is more in line with like a Paradox grand strategy game or something, I'd say, than most 4X games. So it's got this war, you know, this casus belli thing. It's where you have to have a justification. And so I was talking about these provinces. Let's say that like, for example, this province here is probably claimed by another player, right? So if you've got a province that's not being taken, that's not actively being used, or is, you know, it's actively being settled, but it's close to two different players, they're likely to have a claim on that. And if you then go ahead and settle it, you've annoyed them, and you've given them a casus belli. You've actually given them a justification for war. If you trespass through an enemy's territory without permission, that will also give them a reason to go to war. So the diplomacy system gives you various ways with which to interact with players around you. Okay, so you know, you can actually pay them off if you've given them a bunch of war declarations and you don't want them to declare war on you. You can pay them off. This doesn't feel quite as gamey as just dumping some gold on someone and ensuring that you've stopped them from attacking you. The player actually has to consider whether they want to level those relations with you or not. They get a choice, and I think that's a critical thing to think about. So despite the fact I've got some misgivings about Age of Wonders, I've made them quite public, and I'm not going to go on about it here. I don't think the game's quite as good as a lot of other people seem to think it is. That said, it's well designed in many ways, and the flaws that I find in the game are not with the diplomacy. Okay, I think I think other Age of Wonders players might be able to come up with multiple reasons as to why, you know, Age of Wonders has got bad diplomacy. You know, maybe it's easy to cheese, and I just don't know what I'm talking about. But I actually like this diplomacy system, and I think that because Age of Wonders is very much an immersive game, they've put a lot of effort into the immersion, often at the expense of mechanics, actually, but I do think they put a lot of effort into the immersion, particularly with, you know, these wonderful characters that you can create, and you can create all the enemies. And this is a guy I created before, by the way. He's a kind of crazy orc. So your players, you know, your player characters that you've completed games with will then come back and become antagonists that you can play against. They got this great stuff in here, and I think this diplomacy system that they've created is just good enough that it allows you to have this interesting interactions with them, but not just in a way, you know, in an immersive way. It's really tied into the strategic gameplay as well. Okay, so that's Age of Wonders 4. I think it's got a good diplomacy system that really works nicely with the game design. Alright, so for the last little section of this video, God, it's going to be an hour video, but I hope you've enjoyed it. But I'm going to just talk briefly about multiplayer diplomacy, and for that, I'm going to take a look at, I think, probably Shadow Empire or Dominion. So let me just load one of those guys up. Okay, guys, so I've just booted up Dominions, and so multiplayer versus single player diplomacy is starting to become a bit of a thing at the moment. Now, I was going to use Shadow Empire because Shadow Empire was particularly notable for this issue, I think, but Dominion 6 is now, because it added more diplomatic options in single player games, which it didn't really have before. There were ways of actually getting, so Dominions is just very quickly, if you've not played this game before, it's a hardcore strategy game. It's a winner takes all game. There can be only one winner in the game, unless you're playing a Disciples game, but that's just kind of something different. But so you build armies, you build your cities up, you then use the resources that you find in order to build armies and go and just defeat your enemies. That's basically it in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it than that. It's one of the most complex games ever made in terms of the amount of content that there is. It's very, very good as well. This is one of the best games ever made, in my humble opinion, along with Shadow Empire as well. But it's notable now because Dominion 6 actually has diplomacy that you can use. It didn't have this. You weren't able to tell what the AI thought about you in previous Dominions. Now, for years, I was kind of saying to Ilwinter, hey, could we get some diplomacy options? That'd be great. You know, I'd love to be able to, you know, figure out how to get out of wars. It was the one reason why this was considered by a lot of people, particularly in the multiplayer community, to be not a very good single player game, because what happens is usually after a certain point of the game, you would be at war with everybody. Okay, so let's say I'm playing as middle-aged Mictlan here, and we've got Nidavanga. Let's say I'm at war with Nidavanga, and then suddenly Oceania here, is it Pelagia? I can't remember which one this is. Pelagia. So Pelagia suddenly declare war on me as well. Well, now I've got to fight a war on two fronts. And often in single player, you might have a situation where you've got, you know, five AI factions all attacking you at once, and it was they would occasionally not attack you, but you didn't know. And Ilwinter finally were like, oh, by the way, there is a way to get out of wars, you know, you just got to not attack them for a certain amount of time. And I was blown away, because I was like, what? We've been asking for this for years, you know, why didn't you tell us before? And I think they just kind of like forgotten that feature was in there, because nobody really played it like that. In Dominion 6 comes in, and now they've got kind of basic relations, so you can send them messages, right? You can say you can propose non-aggression pacts, which is the main kind of diplomacy that people use in this game. So Dominions is a big multiplayer game. This has got a large and very, very active multiplayer community. I'm going to guess that outside of Civilization, it's probably the most played multiplayer, you know, game in all of 4X. I'm going to guess. There might be a few others. Maybe Gladius might have more players, but this is probably the most played one. There's thousands of players who regularly play this multiplayer. Now, the way that diplomacy was usually handled in multiplayer games is you just send them a message. Okay, so you're either doing diplomacy through the in-game system and sending them a message, so you can kind of just go. I don't think you can do it with multiplayer, but basically you would just click on the button and it would send them a message. In fact, is it here? Send messages. Here we go. Look, so you can send gold and you can send stuff to people. So you can essentially do the same stuff that you would use that you would get from a standard 4X game, except you're talking to a human, right? So you can negotiate very complicated things. Like you could say, and this is something you can't do with a computer. You'd say, okay, Pelagia, let's have a non-aggression pact. So you're not going to attack me, and I agree not to attack you. And I'm going to send you a bunch of gold. And when Nidavanga attacks me, I want you to then go and talk to player, I want you to go and talk to Satis, another player, and I want you to then negotiate a ceasefire between the two of us. Do you know what I mean? I mean, actually, in the way that Dominions tends to work, you don't usually do stuff that's that elaborate. But I'm just kind of overselling it, because the point I want to make is that human beings have got big brains compared to computers, and you can come up with very, very elaborate plans. All of a sudden, this becomes a game of the complexity of something like Emperor of the Fading Suns, except it's even more complex because you've got real human beings who are attached to, you know, the hands that are playing the game, and those real brains can come up with all sorts of goofy, elaborate stuff. Okay, now the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because not just, you know, to give you an insight into how diplomacy works in multiplayer games, in real, you know, against real humans, but I came across a real big problem when I was playing a multiplayer game of Shadow Empire with some friends. And Shadow Empire has, just like Dominions has now, it's got these relations that you can do. You can go for a non-aggression pact, right? And you can set the non-aggression pacts to be binding. What that means is that if I've got a binding non-aggression pact with Pelagia, the Pelagia cannot attack me until the number of turns on the cooldown timer is disappeared. So if we've got a non-aggression pact 3, in the way that's kind of shorthand for saying we are going to have a non-aggression pact. We promise not to attack one another, and when we end the non-aggression pact, you've got to wait 3 turns after the, you know, once that, on the turn that non-aggression pact is terminated, we're not allowed to attack each other for another 3 turns. You've got to count the amount of turns. Now, in Dominion's multiplayer, this was often the cause of a lot of problems because people would be like, okay, right, hang on. Is that like 3 turns from the end of this turn, or is it 3 turns from the turn that I entered the non-aggression pact, or is it? So it would often cause big arguments, and people would break them as well. So for example, Nidavanga and I might have a non-aggression pact, and then I see an opportunity to seize something that they've got, and I just break the non-aggression pact. I'm just like, fuck you, and just attack them. You know, I've done that myself, and people hate it. It's terrible. So there's an unwritten rule that you don't do it. If you do that too many times, people are not going to want to play with you anymore. Although it's kind of okay towards the end of the game if you've got a throne, which is the victory stuff, the victory conditions. I think people are a little bit more tolerant of it if you're taking a throne. But, you know, that's debatable. Well, anyway, the reason why we have these binding agreements now, this has come into Dominion 6 because it now enforces that, you know, that non-aggression pact. Now, some people like that, some people don't. The option to break a non-aggression pact and attack someone early, even though it's kind of, you know, it's really not really done, if you follow me. What I mean by that is, for if you're not English, it means that it's taboo to do that, and you shouldn't do it. There's a kind of, you know, a gentleman's agreement that you don't do that, but in certain circumstances, it's a little bit more acceptable. So some people like to have the option not to break the non-aggression pact, and some people like to have the option to be able to, because it's kind of more fun if you're not quite sure if somebody's going to, you know, be a cheater. It's not technically cheating, but when they're binding, the game physically stops you from being able to attack them until that timer is up. Where the conflict lies now is in games that allow this mixture of real organic diplomacy between players and also have lockdown timer kind of, you know, single player style diplomacy. So Dominions is now in this situation. The thing about Dominions is, though, you can enforce this using a game rule which will say, you know, are you using enforced non-aggression pacts? Shadow Empire doesn't have that. So I probably should have used Shadow Empire to describe this. But in Shadow Empire, I was playing with a player, and we'd agreed to a non-aggression pact in organic diplomacy, just talking on Discord. But I forgot to actually ratify that agreement by sending them an in-game non-aggression pact, okay? And I'd kind of forgotten about that. So I was like, yeah, we'll have a non-aggression pact 3 or whatever, you know, NAP 3 as we call them. And that we agreed to it. But then because I'd forgotten to actually ratify that, somebody exploited that and caused me to have to go to war with them anyway. And I can't remember quite how it happened. So there was this conflict between the hard-coded diplomacy system that the game has and the expectations you have as with the multiplayer organic diplomacy. So I think Illwinter kind of figured this. So what they did was they actually made it so that the game has a way of actually enforcing those non-aggression pacts. That was the other thing. I remember what it was in Shadow Empire now. In Shadow Empire, if you declare war against somebody that you've got high relations with, it causes you big problems, like loyalty problems mostly, and it can be crippling to your economy to the point where you will lose the game. Okay, so what it was that we'd got this non-aggression pact, I think, and then we'd ended the non-aggression pact, but because the game sort of locks you into the non-aggression pact, the way in order to end the non-aggression pact with the player, you have to play this card, and it does a dice roll, right? So we wanted to be at war, but we couldn't because the game was kind of, I could have declared war with our relations that high, but I would have lost the war as a result. So I kept having to play stratagem cards in order to lower our relations artificially. So it was like at 100, and I was trying to get it down to like 50 or something, which would have been manageable for me to be able to declare war without having the massive morale penalty to my units. And he kept playing it back up because he didn't want to go to war. So we ended the non-aggression pact. I wanted to go to war with him, but I couldn't go to war with him because of this lock that was in the game. And that was a skill error on my part. I'm not blaming the game, but what I'm using this to illustrate is that sometimes multiplayer organic diplomacy and single player style diplomatic lock systems, they can often be at odds with one another, and the designer has to think about this in a careful way, which is clearly what Illwinter have done here. They've made some efforts to try to prevent that. Okay, well, that's my half an hour video on diplomacy in 4X games, which has come to an hour. I hope that you made it all the way to the end, and I hope that it's given you something to think about. The purpose of this video was not to slag off any games and say some games were bad, some games are perfect, whatever, but more just to give you an insight into what I've been thinking about, in terms of diplomacy in games. Now, professional games designers might actually be able to chime in and go, actually, Ben, you're kind of wrong about that, or maybe you've missed this consideration about diplomacy when we're talking about designing games. I'm working on an idea for a multiplayer game at the moment that is very heavily based around two things. One, it's based around diplomacy, and two, it's based around resource scarcity, because each player has access to a resource that everyone else needs. Now, I think that this is going to make an interesting game, but I'm not really ready to talk about the design yet because I think it's a little bit early and I don't want anyone to steal my ideas. But games like this have been tried before. They're not always that successful. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if I can get my head around diplomacy and resource economies, because I am convinced that compelling 4X gameplay must include very, very distinct and interesting victory conditions that are also tied into diplomacy and resource scarcity. I think those are the golden triangle, let's say, of 4X games design. And I'm not interested in playing any more 4X games that don't have a strong victory condition that is unique and interesting, that doesn't have a decent resource economy. It just seems to be numbers going up. I want scarcity in my games, and I need meaningful diplomacy, because I think that diplomacy is the key that binds it, is the glue that binds it all together. Thanks for watching, everybody. By the way, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. If you think this is an interesting video and you would like to show it to other people, please share it around. My channel's doing quite well at the moment, and I've got this kind of crazy aim to try to get 1,000 subscribers in a single month. If I can do that, I'm going to be super happy, and I will share the rewards with all of you in various ways. So please share my video, and please subscribe if you're not subscribed, even if you're on a TV or something, man. Like, I sometimes watch YouTube channels on TV, and I know it's more difficult to subscribe on the TV apps, but take that time. I would really appreciate it. It'd be super helpful. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you next time. Take care.